cheap Sunday supper might be the one thing that made surviving the 70s worthwhile. In today's economy, we're here to show you how the 70s mastered living their best lives with retro flavors and budget-friendly tastes. So with fish sticks and tartar sauce, the thing is, it really is a good dish. I have to give credit where it's due. It can hold its own in a number of situations. It's also the perfect kind of thing for more casual dinners, hangouts, and get-togethers too. That kind of also starts to make you wonder why something like this isn't really that popular anymore though, right? Well, I think, honestly, the trends have just changed. Fish sticks were once something that even people outside of coastal cities really enjoyed because they were almost the perfect mid-hangout food. Also, tartar sauce was hard to beat as a dip with fish sticks. They just brought out the best in each other. Now let's say you're mid-conversation during a Lakers game with your main man, and you don't feel like going to the trouble of spending an hour in the kitchen getting something ready to eat. That's totally cool. We've all been there. Let's say you're having a lazy Sunday with the wife at home and you both just can't be bothered. A perfectly normal situation to have fish sticks in. But these days, people just order stir-fry. If we go back to the 1970s, we're going to discover another really popular dessert, which is rice pudding. Now, far be it from me to disrespect one of the greats. Rice pudding has been around far longer than I have, after all. Still, what's true is sadly still true. The days of glory for rice pudding are definitely far away in the past now. Dude, seriously, back in the 70s, this was all people ate for dessert. How could they not? 1, it was stupid easy to make, and 2, it was really convenient and sweet. All you needed was some cheap rice and milk, and that wasn't really breaking anyone's bank account or putting their budget out of order for the month. What you would get was this perfect dessert supper hybrid that would make perfect sense to have after a big meal or even in the cold winter months. I mean, it was definitely a lot more affordable than ordering a tub of ice cream and a lot healthier too. People have unfortunately started to head in different directions with rice though. These days, if people do eat it, it's mostly with things like chicken tikka masala or rice bowls like katsu curry. Not really any room left in the current climate for a rice-based dessert. Speaking of stir-fries, one of the more common ones that wasn't inspired by Asian culture was actually cabbage and sausage stir-fry. And this is definitely something you'd only see in the 70s. First of all, let's be honest. How many Gen Z or Gen Alpha kids do you know that would genuinely ask for cabbage stir-fry for lunch? Uber Eats has the game on deadlock, and that means that people really don't eat stuff like this anymore. Back in the 20th century, though, it was possible for something like cabbage to rise to stardom and even stay at the top and maintain a chokehold on people's diets. Why? Well, that's partially due to the 3-decade-long period filled with 3 history-defining disasters in the 20th century, namely the Depression, the Dust Bowl, and the World Wars. Quite a trifecta, isn't it? Still, that's when cabbage got so popular in America as a cheap and affordable nutrition-filled option that people started to eat it almost non-stop. Adding bits of leftover sausage to the stir-fry gave it a neat little protein element, and that cemented the dish as a rustic 20th century classic for when the going gets noticeably tougher than usual. Another thing that was really exclusive to the 1970s was the country's rediscovered love for casseroles. Things like hot dog casseroles are just proof of this all around. But really, you had a casserole for just about every fruit, ingredient, and meat you had ever heard of. The deal with this one is that it was a cheap casserole and a super beginner-friendly one. Seriously, your nephew could make this if you gave him honest instructions and believed in him enough. I mean, what really is there to do? You just take the pasta and the hot dogs, layer them casserole style, and pop them in the oven. Bam, you're done. And now you have enough food to either share with the family twice over or enough to last you the entire day and then some. Casseroles were super easy to make, convenient, and usually affordable, but could be made with super fancy ingredients if you were feeling like pushing your wallet and could fit just about any taste palette in the entire country. That made them pretty damn hard to beat. Plus, the 70s was known for being a massive return-to-work culture and the grind lifestyle for a lot of Americans, so the need for big, easy, and simple dishes was major. Nowadays, there are a lot of convenient apps and services to do that for you, so there's no need to bother with things like casseroles every other day. despite what I just described about the 70s with casserole, you gotta believe me when I say something like zucchini fritters was also at the forefront of the entire decade. That's the thing about the 70s. It's just got so much going on that you can't box it into any single trend or sentiment that was spreading like wildfire. I mean, sure, there was an immense crowd that deeply preferred casserole-style dishes, and they stuck to that belief hardcore, but there was also a big chunk of America that was tired of the high-calorie, high-prep lifestyle of making big dishes that would last you a while. They wanted to switch to greener food that would help keep them lean, and food that would also work with the party culture that was getting so popular during the 70s. People wanted bite-sized snacks they could gobble up when they were tipsy at parties, not big banquet dinners they had to sit down for and really make space for. Lots of people were treating eating as an excuse to socialize and go out, instead of finding genuine new food or eating for sustenance like in the first half of the 20th century. Again, disrespecting an icon has never been my scene, but I just don't think peanut butter sandwiches are anyone's go-to breakfast anymore like they used to be in the 70s. Really, when was the last time you stopped and made yourself a genuine peanut butter sandwich you were looking forward to right before heading out for work or college or whatever it is? People would much rather prefer to either grab some takeout, get a cute little coffee these days, or just take their Stanley bottle with whatever electrolyte-boosting drink of the day they have. Don't get me wrong, kids and teens will still eat these up, and they make for some amazing late-night snacks. But I feel like overall, we've started to move on a bit from the days where peanut butter sandwiches were reigning supreme over all else, you know? But hey, if you feel differently, please make that known in the comments. Egg group soup is still something you could say is a popular wintertime snack for a lot of people and definitely a comfort food for a niche crowd. But it's not something I would say is in its prime anymore. There were and still are an incredible amount of fans of Chinese cuisine. If anything, that number has only continued to increase with no signs of stopping. I mean, geez, these days we even prefer their TikTok to our own, right? Anyway, that kind of stuff is exactly why egg drop soup got a bit left behind though. You keep getting exposed to a culture over time, and you start to see more and more of it. More traditional recipes, foods, street foods, heritage dishes, all that. You start to leave behind the popular staples that you once went to because you didn't know anything else. It's unfortunately the same deal for things like chow mein and Szechuan chicken, as good as they are. And don't get me wrong, there's a sizable audience for egg drop soup, because who can beat something that's simple and effective? I'm just saying that the audience used to be more regular and bigger. Before I get into why it died down, first, I need to talk about what a hamburger helper even is. This was a packaged convenience food product that General Mills came up with in 1971, and it was a big part of their whole Betty Crocker shtick. The idea was to make something out of a pound of ground beef, and despite the name, there's no hamburger ingredients besides the beef. You had a box with dried pasta, rice, and a seasoning mix. It actually became a big thing in the 70s because it became a symbol of processed food and was one of the most popular packaged products in the nation. On the other hand, it is definitely something I would say is entirely nostalgia-driven now. Hamburger helpers are still available, and they're a convenient meal to go for. Don't get me wrong, but the days of its trends are dead in the water and in the past now. People would go out in droves to get a fix of a hamburger helper back in the 70s, and this was a very much socially expected thing to do, by the way. Like, you know how your friends call you for a round of Chipotle and gossip? That was pretty much the idea back then, too. The things that did this bad boy in are movements like the health-conscious trends that were constantly spreading over America. Lots of people were in favor of healthier, smaller, and leaner meals made using canned food, and their argument was that the national rise of fast food, fusion food, and street food was really just doing a number on everyone's guts. On the other hand, convenience culture really has outpaced dishes like these in longevity, at least. For reasons like these, it's hard to find a good hamburger helper, and even harder still to find someone who still swears by them. Grits with cheese were one of the staples of Southern eating and culture for the longest time before Americans moved on from cornmeal. Hey, I get it. I'd probably tire of it if it was one of the only things I grew up on. People were just used to eating corn in all of its forms, and cornmeal was one of the most popular and normalized ones. As a result, cornmeal grits were common in most homes. breakfast, lunch, or dinner, it really didn't matter. People could honestly just walk into a diner and expect them to serve grits. You didn't even have to take a look at the menu, since any roadside place worth its property value in salt would be serving one. Hell, they were easy enough to make at home. The cheese addition also made it a lot more palatable and made more Americans willing to try it. As far as Southern staples go, this one gets some use still, but only by old heads who remember the days of when you would have this for comfort food instead of a Big Mac and extra-large fries. One of the soups that took off during the 1970s was stuffed cabbage soup. Remember how I said people really became besties with cabbage overall? Yeah, that meant that they were exploring its potential in every avenue of food known to the average American Joe. You had cabbage casseroles, cabbage stir-fries, cabbage stews, and now stuffed cabbage soup. I mean, on the one hand, it was boring as anything could be, and it really needed a lot of aromatics and seasonings to become something you could justify spending time on. On the other hand, it was dirty cheap, like unfairly cheap. And for some people, it was just free. That's right. If you had your own farmland with a crop-growing culture in your family, then you were likely raised growing cabbage, or at least having it in the home a lot. In rural areas, low-income ones and urban ones, for different reasons, whether it was the economics of it at all or the fact that modern American consumerism as they knew it was slowly heading to massive health problems for all participants, people flew like moths to cabbage soup. Vegetarian chili definitely had its heyday in the same time as those moments I was talking about. Listen, when I say movement, I don't mean a 3-day bandwagon full of peaceful sit-ins and protests like we have today. I mean, like nationally, parents everywhere were livid. They couldn't stand that their kids were actually preferring to stay inside with a McDonald's Happy Meal and the television screen, and lots of them became super proactive about their family's diet and eating habits because of the massive revamp in culture. I mean, in this same century, these people went from surviving off of foraging wild mushrooms to watching moving pictures on a screen, having a magic box that just cools all their food full-time, slow cookers, the internet, computers, and God knows what else. All this to say, it was a fast-paced era, and people reacted with what they knew worked: vegetables. If the Depression proved anything, it was that there was a massive problem with people's diets. It wasn't economical, and it definitely wasn't healthy, and the alternative wasn't as impossible to switch to as most people would have you believe. Circumstances like this saw the rise of vegetarian chili and vegan cookbooks, but unfortunately, it couldn't make the cut, especially in the South, where people just outright rejected it. Now, I'll tell you what worked in the South and everywhere else: fried bologna sandwiches. Hey, even the vegans had to reconsider. If you can't beat them, join them, right? No, seriously, these sandwiches were just that good. I don't know if they made bologna better back in the day or if they just laced it with magic drugs, but people were addicted, and I mean bad. This was the working class meal, especially in rural areas. Bologna wasn't only just delicious, it was also insanely affordable and one of the easiest meat products you could ever hope to get. In a post-war America where meat prices still hadn't fully recovered and become what they used to be, bologna sandwiches were more or less a godsend for everyone in the country. A budget-friendly meal before your long, grueling shift with a dash of protein to save your day and nutritional needs. Frying the bologna was also something people deeply took to because of how much flair it would add overall. A simple slice of bologna and some bread slices became the saving grace of many people's days back in the 70s. Something else that was also insanely popular and stopped being that way was oven-baked chicken drumsticks. This is also something I will entirely, and many food analysts and critics will agree with me on, fast food. See, why would you ever bother with the laborious process of marinating drumsticks, gathering the ingredients, making up a spice blend, making a sauce, making a dip, cutting up fries, and going to the store for some affordable soda when Kentucky Fried Chicken has a deal out for a 3-piece combo for $10? Is $10 outrageous for a 3-piece combo? Most assuredly. Is KFC still undoubtedly delicious, convenient, and deeply ingrained into the American cultural zeitgeist? Absolutely. It's not even that there aren't any benefits to making this stuff at home. There are an insane amount of arguments and good reasons as to why it is healthier, smarter, and more economical to just handle your cravings at home with an air fryer, some olive oil or vegetable oil, and drumsticks you can trust. People don't work like that, though. And unfortunately, the saying that humans are creatures of habit couldn't be any more true. People are far too hooked on fast food chains for their supply of fried food, especially classic things like drumsticks. And that just means that ovens don't see a lot of use outside of TikTok trends and one-off videos that content creators might do. So it's not like the 70s were just a period of bad eating, bombastic food, and a lot of good music. It was also the age of fusion food. Ramen stir-fry kind of comes out of this sort of environment. Seriously, people were doing nothing if not experimenting like mad scientists. They were mixing up every food and recipe known to man in an attempt to crack the code at finding the perfect next big thing. Ramen stir-fry, despite how bad people wanted it to live up to their expectations of the next big thing, could not be that, unfortunately. The idea was to take instant ramen noodles and mix them up with the usual assortment of vegetables you see in most stir-fries. And for a time, that worked, but it just wasn't really innovative enough. I mean, ramen on its own already had a decent amount of vegetables and non-meat-related toppings in the broth. The ramen stir-fry that was being made was sort of an attempt to mimic a vegetable-based pasta dish, but it was just okay. Like, nothing spectacular. People still make it for casual snacks and food, and that's pretty much how it was conceived back then, too. Cornbread and beans are another one that we unfortunately just left behind in the 70s. Healthy eating like that looks and sounds real good on paper. And don't get me wrong, people find ways to make it work in real life and practical application too. I mean, it didn't get to being such a popular staple crop for no reason, Unfortunately, people tend to get tired of what they become too codependent on. Corn was abused so much as a crop during the 20th century, whether it was the massive amounts of overfarming for big-time canning companies or whether it was the massive amounts of corn that people were farming and putting to use during the Depression. Suffice it to say that cornbread definitely wasn't something people were waking up excited for, at least not well into the 2000s, when they were exposed to so many options from other cultures. Beans are still a regional favorite, and in the South, there's still a deep-found appreciation for cultural foods like black beans. They just don't really make the front of the cookbook anymore, Shredded pork tacos, on the other hand, are still something that I can confidently say has kept up with the local scene. Do you know how many gaming sessions, yap-offs, and movie nights have been spent preparing, assembling, and binging no tacos? I mean, it evolved from a street food to a party snack to a regular daily part of our lives. You just can't separate America from its tacos anymore, but does that mean there's equity? Is the socio-political state of the taco world a hierarchy where others sit at the top and some get to be stuck at the bottom ladder, forever lost to time? Or is it a spectrum where we all happily enjoy every variation of taco ever and just decide where we want to go on the spectrum to get what we enjoy? Unfortunately, the truth is a mix of both. Now see, lots of tacos have come and gone. That's no secret. Some had a lot more pull than others, and some were a lot more palatable to mass tastes. Shredded pork tacos were something that were really just a showstopper for the taco scene in general. Before this, you had your usual assortment of chicken bites, pinto beans, sour cream, and some veggies. But no one was really delving into pork territory. Did it last all the way to the big 2025, though? I can't say it did. I just don't see enough shredded pork tacos anymore out in the street to count them as being popular, especially in this day and age, where the meaning of the words trendy and popular continue to evolve every day thanks to social media. Baked ziti is still, on the other hand, something I would say does get a lot of action, even today though. Sometimes these American trends confuse the life out of me. Like, I just don't get why baked ziti would outpace shredded pork tacos, It doesn't make sense. It's like saying you'd expect, U2 to outlast Coldplay. I mean, sure, maybe I'm on the younger side when I say this, but U2 had some hits. Coldplay, though? That's kind of my outlook on the whole situation. If you think baked ziti deserves to be in the 2020s with us more than some other items on the list, Feel free to disagree, and actually, disagree pretty loudly in the comments. Back to baked ziti, though. So here you have your usual pasta cheese affair, which seems to be a combination that, across all ages, Americans can't seem to get enough of. It's cheap, it's economical, and it's definitely healthy. Still, it's bland, a bit uninspiring, and, well, just overdone. This is also why you don't see most people making baked zitis outside of 30-something suburban moms. So it's pretty much the same deal with chili con carne. It used to be known as chili with meat and was extremely popular in the 70s, but it ran out of luck. Despite how it was used to being known as the quintessential American comfort food, it was just something that stagnated. In Texas and the southwestern areas of the United States, it was arguably the most popular it had ever been. Canned chili brands such as Wolf and Hormel also made it really easy for people to make stuff like this, and you had every beginner-friendly recipe available in cookbooks all over libraries, magazines, shops, and just anywhere, really. Chili con carne, for these reasons, managed to stay pretty relevant despite entering the game fairly late. It evolved into a lot of different variations and styles because not everyone has the South's preference for diarrhea and inflamed mouths, but it was seen as healthy, or at least it had the potential to be. Vegetarians even started pushing their own plant-based substitutes for the meat elements in the dish instead. I think chili bowls and canned chili in general are just falling out, it seems like these days. People go for more tamer flavors. Spam fried rice and the question of its immediate availability really are something that you would have to think about region to region. In Hawaii, in 2025, I guess, yeah, you could find places that were doing it, or really just make it yourself with any cheap brand of Spam. Everywhere else, though? It hasn't been such a good century for pineapples, really. The anti-pineapple propaganda press has never eased up entirely, at least not since pineapple pizzas were the next big laughingstock of the internet in the 2010s. While the days of hating on things like that are far in the past too, the general divisiveness on pineapples, and therefore Spam, hasn't really gone. Spam fried rice struggles to find a place for itself among today's menus of vegan-friendly food. Fusion food from a mix of 3 different cuisines and cultures, fast food, convenience food, and all the other options that overwhelm our budgets and minds daily. In all of that, why look towards that lonely little can of Spam and a bag of rice? There are killer delis just down the corner, you know? And they deliver. So, that vegetarian chili I was just talking about. Yes, it was its own kind of thing, and yes, it flopped kind of how you would expect it to. I won't say it flopped entirely, since it really did find a place for itself, unlike Spam fried rice and a niche fan base to call family. Unfortunately, that niche fan base and the overall population of the country have both moved on from chili in general. In the South, if you described vegetarian chili to anyone, they'd probably giggle or tell you to eat something real. In urban places like upscale neighborhoods in New York, it was probably a fairly decent and affordable snack. It's not like this would really take a lot of effort from anyone's side. All you had to do was dice up some cabbage, lettuce, onions, and peas and throw it in that chili, get a good mixing going, and you had a bowl ready. Unfortunately, as far as tastes and preferences go, both basic vegetables and chili have started to become used in many different ways. If people crave spice these days, they just go to an Indian restaurant. They don't waste their time with a chili bowl like people used to. Pasta primavera was something that was put into the American culinary scene thanks to one chef, Sirio Maccioni of Le Cirque, which is a restaurant in New York City, and a pretty recognizable one. That name may not mean much to you right now, but this was the brain that made pasta primavera a symbol of sophisticated upscale dining during the 1970s. The intent was to capitalize on the growing national interest in lighter food and foreign cuisines, and one of the first places Americans thought to look for inspiration was Europe, specifically French and Italian cuisines. Of course, the Italian immigrants who still vividly remembered their country's food and delicacies couldn't wait to jump on the opportunity. If you heard a title fight calling your name and you knew the opposition was a punk, wouldn't you go? And who was the opposition here? Beef jerky? The same meatloaf you've been having since the 50s? I think they all felt differently. It was something that even got too many cookbooks too. Nowadays, it's not a trendy restaurant dish, and you'd be hard-pressed to find places that were selling it as their main attraction. But it did still turn a lot of heads. You can honestly make the exact same argument, but in a different way, for turkey croquettes. I know you're immediately going to ask what was so special or riveting about croquettes done with turkey instead of the usual chicken. Well, the thing is, it wasn't so much the croquettes as much as it was that this dish showed Americans other avenues for Thanksgiving food. Hey, nothing's replacing the big fat center stage turkey. But people thought that you could also add to the overall vibe and atmosphere of Thanksgiving if you doubled down on the inclination for turkey. They were also a wonderful way to repurpose any sort of leftover turkey, and in an era that was constantly heading towards lighter foods, smaller plates, and overall more greens, they didn't exactly know how to start using their turkey in different ways. Croquettes, on the other hand, were perfect for a few more reasons than just being a different kind of way of using your turkey. You couldn't spend 15-20 minutes making and assembling a turkey sandwich, especially when streaming services weren't a thing. If you missed your TV back then, you could honestly just consider it gone. Turkey croquettes were easy to make ahead of time, and they were a fun way of handling a lot of meat that would otherwise just go to waste sitting in your fridge. So savory bread pudding is a weird one. I mean, you can't say we didn't give it a shot. We definitely did, and more of a shot than it honestly deserved. This Depression-era recipe started to be something that was just a way for people to repurpose their bread. It meant that you were honestly never going to waste any bread. If you had stale bread, some eggs, and milk, then you would just make a savory bread pudding out of it. Seemed simple enough, right? Well, back in a time when there was literally nothing to eat ever, it was an appetizing option too. As things started returning to normal and people started to gain access to everything we've talked about so far on this list, well, a lot of people just thought it was easier to let that bread die. People had moved on from custards, and they were slowly starting to move on from puddings. This bread pudding, as hard as it may have tried, just couldn't keep up with that. Besides, people's bread wasn't really going stale enough to warrant this recipe being widespread knowledge. So Chili Mac, same deal, right? Good value, good for the time it was in, but couldn't manage to keep up. It was a desperate way for people to reinvent chili in my retrospective, but maybe you'll feel differently. Lots of people really did take to chili and macaroni, so it's not like the idea wasn't worth trying. It's just that it wasn't really all that when compared to everything else that slowly started becoming available. Chili Mac was supposed to be a mix of chili con carne and macaroni, and chili con carne was definitely having its day in the 70s, but the dish had a focus on being convenient. That was what really drew people to it. Boxed macaroni and canned chili go together like butter on toast, and it meant that this was an easy-to-prepare option you could rely on any time of the week, any time of the day. You could bake it into a one-dish meal or bring it to a potluck. It was popular enough at school cafeterias, and some Southern families really swore against everything else when it came to their lunch options. It's still beloved because you can't beat the value at that price point, but it's also something people go to because of rose-tinted glasses and nostalgia. I'm going to throw you in for a kicker, and I'm not sure how you're going to take it. Gnocchi with butter sauce is actually something that people used to eat in the 70s, but the kicker is that the idea of gnocchi being introduced as a daily dish for Americans was a habit that was picked up during the Depression. That's right, the Depression. A gnocchi today might run you a decent amount. I mean, if you were getting enough for a meal. There's a bit of a skill barrier to making it, so it's not like many people can just whip up a batch at home either. This wasn't the case back then, because using all-purpose flour and other substitutes, people actually started to make their own homemade gnocchi for chump change, and the Italians at the time were really helpful in providing knowledge on how to make it. That's kind of why this dish could get popular in the 70s, because it already built a reputation for itself. You know? Unfortunately, you need to be a lot more than just gnocchi with butter sauce if you want to keep up with the riffraff of today. Like so many others on the list, while there's definitely potential here and the pairing makes a lot of sense, there's not enough value for the amount of time and energy that goes into it or the money you spend. Scalloped potatoes, on the other hand, were a type of fusion food, if you could call it that, which people gladly welcomed with open arms. Thinly sliced potatoes that were put in a casserole dish and baked with cream or milk till the potatoes hit just the right amount of softness. End results were quite impressive as well. with people later adding cheese and fried onions to make various different fun ideas on the dish. As far as happy foods go, it may have left out the more filling and savory aspects of a standard casserole, but it was unmatched in terms of taste. Many movie marathons have been sustained purely on scalloped potatoes and some hot wings or potato wedges. People truly love this simple yet sweet dish, which seemed to give them a childish sense of glee. Lots of folk tend to find new favorite foods pretty fast, though, and old ones like scalloped potatoes become history book pages. Scalloped chicken casserole. Here's another classic casserole that deserves a comeback. This dish is the perfect example of simple but mouth-watering good. I mean, just imagine tender chicken pieces in a creamy sauce, seasoned to perfection, and layered with fluffy breadcrumbs. I think I'm feeling hungry now. Scalloped chicken casserole is a great way to use up leftover chicken, and it's perfect for a quick and easy weeknight meal. Not to mention, it's a dish that's sure to please even the pickiest eaters. Who can resist creamy chicken and crispy breadcrumbs? Ditch your takeout menus for a night and take a trip down memory lane by giving this casserole a try. You can find dozens of recipes on the internet, and it won't take you hours to whip up. Trust me, your taste buds will thank you. So today we had shrimp and sushi, and before that we had prawn, and even before that we had catfish and cod. So what came even before that? You'd be surprised, but in the 17th and 18th centuries in America, eels were really common. Early Americans absolutely loved one rendition of eel, which was Old LP, and the fishermen used to keep a sharp and keen eye out for any eel available in lakes. Whether it was local streams or popular fishing spots like Cape Cod, everyone would always gather around a fish market whenever fresh eel was in stock, because everyone wanted to make a fresh batch of eel pies for the family. Despite how tastes change severely throughout the centuries, one thing stays the same. A grandmother always loves creating new food for her children and grandchildren, and a lot of home cooks worked hard to perfect the ultimate old eel recipe that they ended up passing down throughout their families. The taste of old eel pie itself is something that's really hard to describe. It has a texture that's almost similar to apple pie, but it has a really sweet and savory taste working together at the same time. It feels like these flavors are going in opposite directions when you think about them, but in that single pie, all of them manage to sync and create something really unique. Would you ever recreate this dish in your own home, or is it too old-fashioned of a protein for you? Corn pudding is a dish that may not have been as grand as the rest so far, but it was a simple DIY casserole that made your day. Corn pudding was made with stewed corn and thickening agents that helped give it a pudding or custard-like texture. However, it was not typically baked in a traditional casserole case. Instead, it had a custard dish that the pudding would go into and then be baked in. Now, down in the South, this was the food gospel. People just loved it all over, especially in less urban areas where corn was widely and daily consumed, particularly during times of economic uncertainty when households had to cut corners in the kitchen. Corn pudding was a cheap and easy-to-make casserole that was not too shabby. Nowadays, people like that have moved more to poaching local wildlife than taking Mother Nature's gifts, and as a result, corn pudding went extinct too. Remember when your mom used to whip you up lunch for school along with a heartfelt note and a sweet treat? Meat and potato patties were a staple back in the day and a hit in the lunchbox. If you've got some leftover mashed potatoes lying around, you've got to try these. Yeah, these are basically patties made out of mashed potatoes combined with seasoned ground meat, shaped into little discs, and fried till golden brown. They pair perfectly with ketchup, your favorite dipping sauce, or even a dollop of sour cream for a tangy twist. Meat and potato patties are the ultimate finger food that is still a hit to this day. Well, with McDonald's French fries on the rise, these really don't make an appearance that often, but you can whip these patties up anytime. They're surprisingly easy to make. Just give your mom a call and ask for the recipe. Known as Liberty Sandwiches and made by Emma Curtis in 1918, it was described as the perfect wholesome snack to get you a sugar rush whenever you needed it. Also, it was stupidly popular with children, especially around campfires. The stage for this dish goes all the way to Cleveland, Ohio, in 1970. The part of Ohio I'm specifically talking about is South Euclid. And the company I want to tell you about is Amster Pizza Bagel, Inc. They first submitted the idea for pizza bagels to the Copyright Office in 1970, which was the first official birth of the dish. However, the idea was pretty much cooking up a long while before it got the fine print out of the way. You can credit Anthony DeMauro for that, since the actual first time he made one was in 1957. 13 years of messing around with and perfecting the recipe led to a show stealer of a product for Amster Pizza Bagel Inc., which a lot of other fast food chains found hard to compete with. They even had a catchy mid-90s slogan, which you'll probably remember if you were a millennial from those times. Pizza in the morning, pizza in the evening, pizza at supper time, with an earworm of a jingle to go along with it. Here is a casserole that came from Latin American cuisine and worked really well, which is the infamous Mexican egg casserole. Typically stuffed with popular Mexican spices and chilies, along with eggs baked into a dish jam packed with cheese, this meant that you had no worries. Ordering this meant you were getting twice the bang for your buck. No tastes were coming close to the area of flavors this was in, and none that tried to copy it succeeded. See, American flavors do work, but they often have a certain blandness. Spices are not as prevalent in traditional American cuisine, and dishes like these help fill that gap. Mexican egg casseroles were a common find at any Latin American diner or restaurant, perfect as takeout, a meal to enjoy on a date, or even as a treat to savor all by yourself. Nowadays, most restaurants do not commonly sell this casserole anymore, but some old-school Mexican joints may still make a mean one. The tasty meat pie isn't your average store-bought pie. We're talking about a savory masterpiece filled with delicious goodness. This used to be a classic at Thanksgiving and Christmas dinners back in the day before hash brown casseroles came to take the cake. But tasty meat pies had their own beauty. Imagine a flaky golden brown crust with a filling of seasoned ground meat, chopped vegetables like carrots and peas, and a rich, flavorful gravy. The origins of the meat pie have been traced back to the Neolithic period around 6000 BC. Yeah, even the Egyptians were a fan of this classic. It's perfect for a potluck, a family dinner, or even a cozy night in. The best part? Its portability. Just grab a slice and head out the door. It's the ultimate dinner on the go. The tasty meat pie isn't your average store-bought pie. We're talking about a savory masterpiece filled with delicious goodness. This used to be a classic at Thanksgiving and Christmas dinners back in the day before hash brown casseroles came to take the cake. But tasty meat pies had their own beauty. Imagine a flaky, golden brown crust with a filling of seasoned ground meat, chopped vegetables like carrots and peas, and a rich, flavorful gravy. The origins of the meat pie have been traced back to the Neolithic period, around 6000 BC. Yeah, even the Egyptians were a fan of this classic. It's perfect for a potluck, a family dinner, or even a cozy night in. The best part? Its portability. Just grab a slice and head out the door. It's the ultimate dinner on the go. Fisherman's stew was something that got popular because of necessity. Back then, fishermen used to be out at sea for so long that they'd often go days or sometimes even weeks without seeing home or their families. It was the cons of the job, you know? What were you going to do? Sit at home and hang your net, giving it all up because you haven't had enough time to unwind? One thing that hasn't changed about America ever is that the grind never really stops, so that certainly wasn't an option. What was an option was making the best use of whatever the catch of the day was. Sometimes you'd get shellfish or crawfish. Sometimes you'd get proper sea bass or red mullets and monkfish. If you kept some basic vegetables and seasoning with you, like red pepper, onions, cayenne, and salt, then you could still make a pretty serviceable stew. This is kind of why the term fisherman's stew is a bit of an umbrella phrase. Depending on where you are in the country or what kind of time period you're talking about, it can really mean 20 different things. Just mixing up the spices creates an entirely new dish, so imagine what it was like changing up the main star, the fish, almost every day. They were creating new stews on a daily basis without even knowing it. It caught on so much and became such an acquired taste for your average fisherman that they began having it at home too. And from there on, you can probably put 2 and 2 together. You have one really versatile dish that can work with like 15 kinds of fish, almost every seasoning in your cabinet, and every vegetable in your pantry. Stews themselves are really affordable and feed whole families while keeping everyone's health up, so it's no wonder that so many grandmas and grandpas used to serve this as lunch. Now let's put the Frankenburger casseroles and chicken pot pies aside and go back to a real icon like the shepherd's pie. Your mother knows of this, her mother knows of this, her mother's dad knows of this, and his fourth cousin had this every year for family gatherings. Not an exaggeration by any means, the shepherd's pie really was just that loved across every state. Just simple meats like lamb or ground beef cooked or minced to their limit, baked and topped with mashed potatoes in a casserole. Literally, what more does a person even ask of a plate of food? Can we get much higher? Was the question on most chefs' minds, as shepherd's pie was hard to improve on, making the market highly competitive. No one had one unique standout shepherd's pie, and most were as good as each other. Of course, that meant great things for customers, but sadly, those days of privilege and good-tasting casseroles are gone now. Shepherd's pie is more a Southern tradition than a statewide phenomenon now. Hear me out, this one might sound a little boring at first glance, but trust me, it's a classic for a reason. The split pea soup is a hearty, filling, and surprisingly healthy-ish, thick, creamy soup packed with vibrant green split peas and other vegetables like carrots, celery, and onions. Now, on that healthy-ish claim, it depends on how much butter and cream your grandma used. The split pea soup is the kind of soup that leaves you feeling satisfied for hours. It has been a St. Patrick's Day staple ever since its origin in 1905. The best part? You can totally customize it according to your liking. Yeah, don't be shy to throw in your favorite veggies, add a splash of lemon juice for a bit of brightness, or even some leftover shredded chicken for an extra protein punch. We really need to bring this one back. Something you can always associate with your grandma's cooking is waffles. There was no place in the world that could make a waffle better than your grandma, which is a belief that a lot of kids would fight you over. And I really do mean fight you over. For the kids, the peak of the experience was probably just getting those freshly baked waffles with maple sauce poured all over them. But for grandmas, the best part of the dish was how you could sneak in other things that the kids really needed and didn't eat enough of along with them. For example, one of the most popular combinations was catfish and waffles. Now, I don't really need to give you a rundown on America's relationship with catfish, especially around coastal and rural areas that are near lakes and rivers, or anywhere you'd find catfish swimming around. It's one of the most affordable and easy-to-make meals, and you can spin it 100 different ways. Baked catfish, fried catfish, steamed catfish, it just doesn't get old. You take it a bit further and match it up with waffles, which gives them that contrast that cooks are always looking to give to catfish with sauces and spices. But it doesn't really hit the spot like this does. It goes to show that you never really can teach grandmas anything, can you? Here's another one that takes hearty inspirations from our Mexican neighbors. Enchiladas casseroles were the talk of the town when they first showed up. See some people randomly combining foods that work just fine. Solo are not mad scientists. They are real visionaries, and there is a tunnel with a light at the end only they can see. In this case, the luminescence came from the light bulb that went off in people's heads when they thought two things. Why not use layered tortillas with enchiladas and other vegetables? Kick it up a notch with a sauce that actually worked in casseroles paired with cheesy meat, and you had a winner. Every winner must let go of their championship belt someday, and these were no exception. Chicken fried steak. This classic is long gone but never forgotten. This one's pretty easy to make too. All you need is a chicken steak dredged in a seasoned flour mixture, dipped in a wet batter, and finally coated in a crispy breading. Fry till it's golden brown for the perfect dinner that'll leave you wanting more. Chicken fried steak is typically served with a creamy gravy for dipping, along with mashed potatoes and vegetables for a complete and oh-so-satisfying meal. It is basically American, and the yassified version of the Austrian dish Wiener Schnitzel, and the Italian dish cotoletta alla Milanese. Fancy names, but the same old fried chicken steak. Now I know what you're thinking. Why did this crispy golden goodness leave us too soon? Well, you can trick yourself all you want, but it's not the healthiest dinner out there. But hey, having a fried steak once in a while can't do much harm, right? Just be prepared for some finger-licking good action. This dish is messy, but in the best way possible. Bourbon and chicken wings go together like birds in the sky, or like strawberry jam and bread. They've been one of the most definable aspects of American cooking and eating ever since they were first made in New Orleans, Louisiana, which got popular for its bourbon chicken. It used to be a subset of Cajun-themed cooking, but slowly, over time, its roots got diluted and it became more of a nationwide thing that everyone got into. One of the most popular types of bourbon whiskey was cherry bourbon, and one of the best ideas people ever had was mixing that with chicken wings to get a cherry bourbon edition of the best side dish ever known to man. The taste is impeccable. The bourbon enhances every single thing about the chicken wings, while adding a new flavor from the cherry aspect. It kind of gives it this sweet aftertaste that's not really overbearing. You know, some of the best additions and flavors to a tried and tested classic are ones that don't overstay their welcome. They don't overwhelm what you already love about the dish, they just take it a step further with the addition of something new. That's why this dish got so popular at cookouts and pot roasts and was a given if your family was having a pizza night. African American families in particular would love a big combo of chicken wings doused in cherry bourbon, because no party really felt complete without them. You might think I'm over-exaggerating because what can whiskey really do? Well, once you bake these wings to crispy perfection and then add them in a cherry bourbon BBQ sauce, you'll know just how good they are for yourself. Give it a try because it's probably the easiest recipe on this list so far. Firstly, fine dining and delectable foods are the perfect themes to start our list, and there is no better dish to represent that than chicken divan. Chicken casseroles stuffed with broccoli, cheese, and a special sauce. Not just any sauce from down the alley, this was the signature taste of the Divan Parisian restaurant, which actually invented chicken divans in New York City around the early 20s. Hence the association with fine dining, and its price matched its aesthetic. Like seriously, this thing cost you $1 and then some back then. Naturally though, everyone could not spread their bank account, so do-it-yourself, cheaper alternatives of the dish came around. For those who could get it, they would gladly shill out their wallets for something so divine though, and that is the saddest part of it all. You could not find an authentic chicken divan anywhere if you tried even in a home chef's kitchen. Stuffed peppers. Forget those boring pre-made things you see at the grocery store because stuffed peppers are here to save the day. We're talking about the beautiful bell peppers Grandma made on Thanksgiving. Vibrant red, yellow, or orange peppers are hand-picked and carefully hollowed out and then stuffed with a flavorful mixture of fluffy rice, seasoned ground meat, and your choice of chopped vegetables. Once stuffed, these peppers are baked to perfection until they are tender and crisp. Now, this isn't just a casual meal. Whipping up a stuffed pepper might make you feel like a master chef in the kitchen. It's also a great way to use up leftover rice and ground meat. Bonus points. If you use their visual appeal to trick your children into getting their daily dose of veggies. Yeah, the little ones don't really go for the green peppers on the table, but they might just love these stuffed peppers. You might even add some cheese to top it off. Unfortunately, it is one of those dishes that has faded from many dinner tables. If you take a look at the history of Brooklyn, you'll find something that was really popular, which was ham cheese balls. These were the perfect bite-sized appetizer to gorge yourself on while you waited for the main meal. A lot of grandmas would have handwritten notes tacked onto family cookbooks about how to make the perfect ham ball, what the ratio of meat was, how much cheese you needed to put in, how much you needed to roll them and shape them before they were perfect. It was one of those snacks that just did well everywhere. In Iowa, too, it was one of the most easily available snacks you could find anywhere in the state. All in all, it's one of the best things to ever come out of the Midwest, and no Christmas is honestly complete until you down a platter of ham cheese balls and make the tray look spotless. Have you ever grown up around these? Do you still remember the taste? It's not something you would find so often nowadays, but the days when it was really everywhere were some good ones. While we have one creating a luxury eating experience and the other being a healthy way to enjoy a classic, beef and noodles casserole is something that simply raises questions. Yes, people had many fond memories of coming back home from a bad date or a long shift to a cup of beef and egg noodles. Lines have to be drawn just as much as delectable food needs to be consumed, and Americans drew theirs by putting it in a casserole. Ground beef and egg noodles in a tomato sauce sure seemed like a good dose of Mom's spaghetti. Only Mother Dearest never made her casseroles that way. Her spaghetti, meatballs, and her casserole pies were always separate dinners. Most old or middle-aged folk wanted to keep those customs, but the newer generations at the time were more open to it. Popular among the young crowd bold enough to try out new dishes, it eventually faded away as more and more people rejected the mix. Back in the 1950s, the Divan Parisian restaurant at Chatham Hotel in New York City gave birth to its signature dish, the Chicken Divan Casserole. This mouth-watering dish soon found its way to all our homes, and I'm not complaining. It's made of tender chicken pieces nestled amongst vibrant green broccoli florets in a rich and creamy sauce, topped with a generous layer of melty cheese and a sprinkle of crispy breadcrumbs. The chef who leaked this recipe out to the public really took one for the team, and we can never thank him enough. It's the perfect combination of protein, veggies, and all the cheesy goodness your heart desires. Just maybe pair it with a side salad to pretend you're being healthy. Chicken Divan Casserole is the retro dish of every cheese lover's dreams, and you know what that calls for? A comeback. It's a classic at throwback parties, but you don't really need an excuse to cook this up. A typical Tuesday night works too. I know we've had some wacky sandwiches and spread combinations in the history of the nation so far. A lot of those started off as slightly divisive, but they ended up making a place for themselves, growing out of the niches they carved into the food culture in America. Unfortunately, for fluffernutter sandwiches, it really did stay mostly as a niche, but a pretty good one. This takes your typical bread, nothing really special, and your typical peanut butter, again, nothing you haven't seen around the block 1,000 times, and adds a bit of a twist. You ever think about what peanut butter could be stacked on top of some thick marshmallow creme? Me neither, until I was searching about the history of this dish and how they were a Massachusetts classic. Just like its predecessor on this list, baked spaghetti casseroles did not last too long either. We remember well and clear what people's candid opinions on beef and noodles casserole was. A lot of the millennial crowd believed that it was a dish with no real sense of self. Like, if you want spaghetti, just have spaghetti. Casseroles are somewhere else on the spectrum, and maybe they were right in avoiding it without even a single try. Some people did give it a fair shot, though, and ended up liking it, but the general consensus was that spaghetti sauces do not go well with casserole dishes. Nor do they fare well when baked with cheese. Baked spaghetti casseroles kind of had a cult following, and because of that, they never lasted long enough to be more than a footnote in the ages. Stuffed chicken rolls. Don't you dare confuse these with Mickey D's chicken nuggets. Stuffed chicken rolls are the dinner of every kid's dream, 'cause who wouldn't want this cheesy goodness instead of some plain old broccoli soup? Imagine thin-sliced chicken breasts pounded to tender perfection, and then filled with a savory mixture of seasoned ground ham and melty cheese. Stuffed chicken rolls are a great way to elevate a simple chicken breast, and they're perfect for a special occasion or a fancy weeknight dinner. They're surprisingly easy to make, so don't be intimidated by their fancy appearance. Despite its appeal, stuffed chicken rolls have become less common as people opt for simpler, quicker meals. This has to be by far one of America's greatest inventions, because even though it has vanished from dinner tables in the States, other nations around the world are devouring them. You used to only find a coq au vin blanc in French restaurants that really knew what they were doing. Top-of-the-line premium joints, the kind you'd maybe have to save up for. The black variation itself is a slow-cooked chicken stew, and this one is made with white wine instead of red wine. Some people that were familiar with the ins and outs of French cooking and had a good grasp of it would actually even make it at home. And I'm talking about before the slow cooker became everyone's best friend. They would really do the hours-long prep work just to get a taste of this, and it was worth it too. However, when the slow cooker did eventually come in, they let go of the ceramic pots, the cast iron Dutch ovens, and the hours spent waiting for it to simmer and absorb the flavors. This meant that you no longer had to go out just to a restaurant for a coq au vin blanc. You could just as easily prepare one overnight at home without even paying much attention to it. The braising process was easily imitated by any standard cooker. Naturally, that kind of accessibility means a huge rise in fans, and this dish had no shortage of them even outside of French-American households that focused a lot on eating traditional, rather than keeping up with the times and going for canned. In contrast, green bean casserole is a dish that reminds you of home. Bean casserole with mushroom soup that reminds you of afternoons spent driving to your aunt's or your vegan uncle who claims he makes an allegedly good one. Historically, the soup was something that America went more towards in the 80s and 90s. Remember our past videos had things like deep-fried cheese balls and whatnot? Yeah, that just could not last, and being honest, nobody expected it to. Definitely a you-had-to-be-there moment that would be overshadowed by people wanting to eat healthier. Probably to make up for past dietary sins, these people came to worship easy recipes like the green bean casserole. Sadly, nowadays, people prefer much more vibrant-tasting soups that do not make them feel like they are only eating it for the health benefits. Biscuits and sausage gravy. Okay. This southern staple might still be a thing in some parts of the country, but let's be real, biscuits and sausage gravy is definitely not dominating breakfast menus anymore. I guess waffles are to blame for that. But this breakfast legend is the perfect combination of fluffy buttermilk biscuits so light and airy they practically melt in your mouth, along with a creamy sausage gravy, rich with savory sausage and speckled with black pepper. This is a breakfast, or hey, no judgment here, even a dinner combination that's pure comfort food heaven. From the perfect hangover cure to a delicious weekend treat, biscuits and sausage gravy satisfy all cravings. Just maybe lay off the white clothes while you're indulging. That sausage gravy can be a bit enthusiastic when it comes to staining. Chicken pot pie. Casserole needs no explaining because it takes three things the citizens of the US love and makes them into one polished, perfect food. Firstly, a chicken pot pie, the kind you are used to your mother making or your dad picking up from that great spot at every corner. Then you paired chicken pot pie with a casserole dish and topped it off with a biscuit topping, which made for the perfect savory flavor. You had yourself a dish that gave the crunchy, the gooey, the tangy, and the food coma all in one. One that people had in every state during holidays, as this dish would be center stage on the dinner table. Man, this was even widespread enough that people would sometimes bring it into work. It really makes you think, what made something like that go out of fashion? Maybe people wanted to move away from dishes that had nothing but meaty flavors with cheeses and sauces. The ground beef veggie stew is the perfect combination of simple ingredients and a big flavor. This dinner dish is a budget-friendly and nutritious dinner option made with ground beef and a variety of vegetables. Plus, it's a great way to use up any leftover vegetables you might have hanging out in your fridge. You can customize this stew to your liking. Throw in some chopped potatoes for extra starch, or add a splash of your favorite hot sauce for a kick. Ground beef. Veggie stew is a classic comfort food that's easy to make, but let's be honest, it's vanishing from our tables because it can't compete with the modern options. You know, like the Crunch Wrap Supreme from Taco Bell. I bet Taco Bell doesn't remind you of your grandma and your cousins, though. This one is definitely something that did not sit well with some, while it was something being served at every dinner for others. The tuna noodle casserole was a divider, a controversy raiser, if you will, and one that set people into arguments across every forum, thread, and tweet out there. Some people said that America was too stuck in the brief moments where it hit culinary gold and needed to experiment more if it wanted to recreate those highs. Others said there was no need of messing up a dish that worked fine on its own, always has, and already has 100 different versions. So what you had was something you had to ask your friends if they were okay with, or else you were ordering out. When you see it from that angle, tuna noodle casseroles could never have really lasted too long. The hamburger helper casserole takes the flashiness factor and ups it to a 10 unlike corn pudding. Blurring the lines between a casserole and lasagna, this dish also blurred the lines between a simple Tuesday baking session and a literal gift of God. Consisting of pasta, hamburger patties, and a cheesy sauce layered on top, this mixture was then baked into a casserole. As you kept getting deeper into the behemoth, the more irresistible it would get. Although this dish was really high in saturated fats and calories, most doctors recommended avoiding trendy foods like these for their link to heart problems too. Hence, people took much more cautionary attitudes toward their line blurring, making hamburger helper pizzas a thing of the past. That wraps up all the cheap Sunday suppers making the 70s worth living. Which dish was your favorite? Comment down below and don't forget to like and subscribe.